Persona 5 is bad. I don't know how else to put it, so there it is. As a game, it's fantastic. Legitimately the best of the series, possibly one of the most well-constructed games of the SMT universe. It's aesthetically and stylistically gorgeous, virtually perfect, but as a story, it's bad. When the game came out, I streamed it blind on our Game Virgin's Twitch and quickly began getting into arguments with our fans that were unflappably defensive of it. And those arguments led to me deconstructing the entire game's flaws and eventually promising to explain not just why it was awful, but how it could also be fixed. So that's what we're going to do. I'm joined by Cody, who's been on this journey with me from beginning to end as we try and fix just what's wrong with Persona 5. Spoilers ahead.
Let's start with the game's opening. There's no denying that it's gripping. Persona is notorious for taking hours to get started, but in 5, you're given a modicum of immediate control by starting the game in the middle of the story. Just like a thief, you're making your getaway with the treasure that you've stolen, battling your way through shadows only to be apprehended by the police who give you the information that someone on your team has betrayed you.
Here's the first problem. There is no mistaking who the traitor is. Just from that opening sequence alone, you know instantly that it's the boyish voice that never receives a character portrait as you make your getaway. Hell, the game's OP doesn't disguise it either. You see every member of your team except for the mysterious boy on the cover of the game. Even if you haven't figured it out from the process of elimination, because this is Persona, so your traitor can't be a waifu, nor can it be the mascot or your best friend, you're left with two possible options, and it's immediately evident that Goro Akechi, the detective who opposes the Phantom Thieves, is not what he seems.
So if you're not going to hide it, why the shocking reveal that someone sold you out? There's no tension or suspicion of your friends as you make your way through the game, and if anything, it immediately pits the player against him because you know he's a backstabbing traitor. He's made instantly irredeemable despite being a real, nuanced character, and making the player hate him prevents them from seeing that until it's too late. It's counterintuitive to good storytelling.
As compelling as the action opening is, it's nothing but a hook that becomes flawed when you circle back around to it. For me, I'd rather do away with it entirely and start where the story actually begins as you meet Sojiro, but I understand how much a good hook is worth. So in our fixed Persona 5, you're not told of a traitor. Instead, you are arrested, tortured, and drugged just as before. When you refuse to give the cops what they want, you are left alone in the room. You wait silently for your next interrogator. As the door opens and you look up, you watch your character's eyes widen, the door clicks shut, and the sound of a silencer being placed on a gun is heard. Pointed directly at your head, the gun goes off, and your protagonist drops dead. The iconic butterfly floats by, and a voice tells the player that they must remember what led to this or face the certain ruin you see before you.
This means getting rid of the interrogation cut-ins, but that's fine considering how little they add to the game anyway. The framing device is nice, but unnecessary. And it's not like there's any real benefit to Sai's story-based confidant progression. Like, what the hell is this? Now, you might be led to believe that it's the goddamn Great Seal or Myriad Truths, but it's nothing.
There's very little about the first 2 months that need fixing. The escalation from Kamoshida to Madarame is effective in getting the player invested in the conflict. The only alterations to be made are with the metanav, which, in this scenario, doesn't mysteriously appear on the protagonist's phone. This scene plays out otherwise exactly the same, with the protagonist witnessing Arsene, his rebellion, and his first glimpse into the metaverse, only to shake it off and go about his day.
Next is when the protag first meets Ryuji. They share a moment where he bitches about Kamoshida when they suddenly spot a cat wander off in the rain. It looks injured, so they decide to go after it and see if it's okay, only to stumble into the castle. From there, everything else plays out the same. When they meet Morgana there, he programs the metanav into their phones himself.
The rest proceeds normally too, all the way through Madarame's palace until the end where he mentions the Black Mask. Here Morgana has a reaction saying that it couldn't be, but refuses to elaborate to the team.
This is where we're really going to start to deviate. See, originally, Hifumi was meant to be a part of the Phantom Thieves, but she was cut early on because the game was too long. This fact led us to theorize that a lot of the roles Hifumi originally played in the group's dynamic were thrown onto Makoto and ended up weighing her down as a character. So instead, we're proposing to write Hifumi back in and lighten the burden on the student council president.
Stay with me here. As the fresh blood in the Phantom Thieves, Yusuke offers up their next target for the sake of a girl at his school. Dubbed the Shogi Queen, she transferred to his private academy to avoid some scandalous rumors about her family from a nasty tabloid reporter. This has tainted her career, her dreams, and worst of all, resulted in bullying from her peers.
We became Phantom Thieves for the sake of those dreams, did we not? Stealing the hearts of those who take away the futures from those who cannot fight back. That is what it means to be a phantom thief.
Inspired, the decision is unanimous, and the team makes their way through mementos in search of the reporter that wrote the article about Hifumi's family, only to discover that their informant was none other than Hifumi's mother herself. Distraught by this, the team tries to figure out how they could possibly steal her mother's heart, but with no information to go on, they're at a loss.
The Shujin team members have their field trip to the television station the next day, where they meet Goro for the first time. Considering how important this scene is to the plot, it plays out no differently. Though, perhaps to make it a little more apparent to the players, since it was extremely subtle, Morgana could have a small reaction to himself just as Goro walks off.
The next day, Goro's interview draws attention to the Phantom Thieves, but this time he blatantly draws the parallel to the occurrence of mental shutdowns. He claims, hypothetically, the means that the Phantom Thieves have to suddenly change a person's character is frighteningly similar to the sudden change in people's mental states occurring lately, and that if people like that act outside the laws meant to protect us, how can we be certain they won't get out of hand in the future? This unsettles the group, and after the interview, they question their motives out of fear of their own power.
Morgana reminds them that the possibility of shutdowns had been established from the start, but that they've succeeded in staying on the right path by keeping the shadows intact. Treasures, he tells them, are only a result of the distortion, and the shadow is the linchpin to a person's cognition. As long as the shadow is safe, the people they steal from are too.
On their way out of the television studio, they bump into Hifumi and her mother Mitsuyo, who are on their way to a televised interview as well. Mitsuyo scolds them for being in their way before storming off to the green room with her daughter. Realizing who that was, they hurry to see if the Metanav will recognize a palace for her. Hifumi, embarrassed, decides to turn back and apologize to the group just as they enter the metaverse, and she slips in with them. Though stunned, she listens carefully to understand the sights that she is seeing.
Mitsuyo's palace would be an elaborate mansion with shadows dressed as maids and butlers that wait on their master hand and foot. Paparazzi shadows would also clamor for her attention. As a former star, Mitsuyo views the television studio as her home, and the team realizes that she is using Hifumi's career as a shogi idol to vicariously live as a star again. Destroyed to discover that her mother staged all of her matches, Hifumi's rebellious spirit takes hold, and she reveals herself to everyone to confront her mother's shadow.
Can you finally hear me, child? It is time to remain silent no more. I am not a mouthpiece for a god that commands my life. Our contract is a verbal one. If you accept me, then speak with your own voice and let yourself be heard.
All this time, I thought if I played dress up for you, that would make you love me. But you never wanted to play with me. You only wanted to wear my victories as if they were your own. Not anymore, Mother. This time, I'll wear the blood of my enemies and win on my own merits.
Awakened, Hifumi's Phantom Thief outfit would likely be a short kimono to exemplify her royal status, with a naginata as her weapon and concealed shuriken as her gun. Her persona would actually be named Johanna, but designed to reflect more on the theme of Shogi Queen and the wolf in sheep's clothing imposter idea of her rebellion. This leads to her nickname also being Queen.
We'll get to Makoto momentarily. For now, Hifumi thanks the team for helping her realize this about her mother and promises them she'll take care of it from here. She confronts her mother about the article, but Mitsuyo, infuriated that her daughter would ruin the career she is crafting for her, threatens her with compromising pictures she has taken of her daughter privately. She says that if Hifumi says anything to the journalists about this, she will release another scandal even bigger than their family's plight.
This sets the deadline to Hifumi's next big television appearance in 2 weeks, and she quickly seeks out the Phantom Thieves through Yusuke at school. They all agree to help Hifumi, and she joins the team as their strategist. They infiltrate Mitsuyo's palace and change her heart to mend her relationship with her daughter. But, with no mention of the Black Mask, the team questions if Madarame was bluffing.
Our next big change is with Makoto. Up to this point, just like in the game, she's put into the compromising position of having to figure out who the Phantom Thieves are, while students are being taken advantage of by organized crime members. For the most part, none of that changes, but instead of drug trafficking, we're going to up the ante and implement Makoto's confidant story.
Makoto regularly stalks the protagonist throughout the game, and the scenes where she is put under pressure by Kobayakawa stay intact. She confronts the team with her suspicions, but with no evidence just yet, she is quickly denied and instead made to feel guilty for never realizing Kamoshida's perversion as before. Instead of lashing out, she becomes distraught over doing the right thing.
This culminates at the dinner scene with Sai, but this time an extra layer is added by adding Goro, who Sai is invited over to eat with them. Makoto questions if Sai, like Goro, really believes that the Phantom Thieves are evil merely because they make criminals admit their crimes. After all, to admit a crime means the person must recognize that their actions are wrong. Sai talks to Makoto about how important it is to follow the rules, reminding her of how their father got himself killed because he followed his heart and not his head. Goro agrees with Sai, telling Makoto that this is why they have laws.
Falling in line with the rules, no matter how they make you feel, is necessary to not stir up trouble and burden others.
Makoto's uncertainty finally shifts when she discovers her friend Eiko has gotten caught up in the host scam and is at risk of getting sold off in a sex trafficking ring.
Frustrated that the principal is more concerned with the Phantom Thieves and not the student body's plight, Makoto relents on the Phantom Thieves, confessing to them that she believes they are just, and as the student body president, it's her duty to protect her fellow students. Morgana, however, questions her sudden change of heart, and, in a role reversal, encourages the protagonist to go off and stalk her instead.
Joker and Morgana discover that Makoto is forcing her way into the sex trafficking ring to investigate, and they bring this information back to the team. Realizing that Makoto is just and in need of their help, they agree to try and stop Kaneshiro, but with no clues other than his name, they're at a loss for what to do.
The next day, Joker spots Makoto sitting outside the school by herself, buried in her notes. They interact one-on-one for the first time, and she explains to him that her father was a cop, confessing that this is his old case file notebook. She tells him that she questions if she's chosen the right path to justice, wondering if he'd be proud of her, as acting the way he did was what got him killed. Joker assures her that she's a good person, and she thanks him before taking off.
Morgana, however, notices quickly that his phone has gone missing, and they realize that Makoto stole it from him in the middle of their conversation. They chase her down, running past the others at the hideout, and Morgana fills them in on what Makoto is doing. Just as they turn a corner, she's disappeared, her father's notebook on the ground. Looking into it, they realize that she had managed to crack the keywords for Kaneshiro's palace in the metanav, and they go in after her.
As a real customer to Kaneshiro's bank, Makoto is allowed in immediately, and they follow her. When they catch up to her, she has confronted Shadow Kaneshiro, pointing a gun at him and threatening him.
I'm not here to pay up. I'm here for payback!
Kaneshiro suddenly realizes that Makoto is the daughter of the cop that almost caught him, but he laughs at her threat. He berates her father for being foolish enough to oppose him, pointing out how he left her and her sister with a great burden to bear. He calls her foolish as well for acting so thoughtlessly, asking if she's looking to burden her sister further. This leads to her awakening, however.
So doing what's right is just a burden, is it? That's fine. I accept to carry that burden, to protect those who are close to me, to provide justice for the victims who can't fight. I'll carry that burden until the day I die, because carrying that weight makes me stronger than weak people like you.
This awakens Makoto to her persona, Rocinante, Don Quixote's ordinary horse made extraordinary by its rider, which she takes on as her codename instead of Queen.
Because fuck you, Makoto! Riders are cool!
When Makoto joins the team, she returns Joker's phone, apologizing for stealing it from him. Still, she remarks coyly,
Turns out I'm quite the thief myself, huh? Who would have thought? The palace doesn't need to be changed from here. Instead of the deadline being the pictures getting leaked, Makoto is instead threatened to be sold off into the sex trade. Kaneshiro is defeated, but as he grovels, he mentions the black mask, and the team is startled by this again. Morgana immediately begins looking around as the palace collapses and spots someone, shouting, "Noir!" as he runs off.
The team escapes by the skin of their teeth, though worried where Morgana could have gone off to. They reassure themselves he knows what he's doing and that he'll come home soon before leaving to go their separate ways. The next day, however, Morgana doesn't return, and they grow more concerned.
The next day at school, he's approached by Haru, who asks if he's Joker. She tells him that she has Mona and invites him to her home after school. He agrees, and the team cautiously follows Haru to the Okumura residence.
There, they are reunited with Morgana, who apologizes for not telling them about Noir. He was injured in Kaneshiro's collapse, so she was taking care of him until his strength returned. Here, Haru begins to tell them about how she came to meet Morgana earlier that year, before any of them.
My father was very cruel to his employees, and he was becoming someone very different from the father that I knew. He even threatened to sell me as a bride to a total stranger. I could only pray for a miracle. And then one day, I met Mona. It felt like fate. He gave me the metanav, and together we infiltrated my father's palace to take his treasure. But despite what Mona assured me, my father died suddenly at a press conference where he confessed to his own crimes and killed himself. I couldn't keep going as a phantom thief after that, and eventually, Mona left my side. However, when Kamoshida had his change of heart, he survived, and I became suspicious. I watched as you all did the same thing that Mona and I did again and again with no casualties, and I realized that someone must have made my father kill himself that day.
Morgana is shocked by this conclusion, but the Phantom Thieves all agree that if this is in fact a possibility, then they should look into it with Haru. She joins the team and thanks them for their help, and Okumura's palace never happens.
In Futaba's room, she reacts to the information that she is reading on screen. She is looking over the data regarding Okumura's suicide when she lurches, and the cognitive Wakaba begins speaking to her, blaming her for the real Wakaba's death. Futaba panics and passes out, and Sojiro bursts into her room after her cries. He picks her up from the floor, places her in her bed, and grieves over how little help he is as he watches over her for the night.
The next day, the Phantom Thieves decide to meet at LeBlanc to discuss their plan of action. Outside the cafe, they hear a heated discussion between Sai and Sojiro about Wakaba's research and the girl, Futaba. When Sai leaves, she's shocked to see Makoto, who quickly lies and says that she's tutoring her friends. When they go in to see Sojiro, he is clearly distraught from the conversation, and Makoto presses to find out what her sister is doing.
Sojiro eventually yields, confessing that he has a daughter that Sai is threatening to take away. He explains Futaba's situation as someone unable to stand up for herself, and he leaves them with the comment that if the Phantom Thieves really did exist, he wishes that they would change this poor girl's heart so that she's not plagued by it anymore. They agree then and there to help the boss.
As they try to come up with keywords, they aren't successful. At first, unprompted, Morgana spits out the keyword tomb, and they are able to enter the desert town. They spot the palace pyramids in the distance of a vast desert, and they realize that its location from there is actually Sojiro's home, where Futaba is. Morgana transforms, and they travel to meet Shadow Futaba.
The rest of the palace stays intact, with the key delineation being the change in deadline to Futaba being taken away from Sojiro. Futaba's shadow and cognitive Wakaba remain the same, but we learn more about Futaba's plight when Haru produces a cognitive version of her father in the palace, as parallels between the girls are drawn with their guilt for being responsible in the deaths of their respective parents.
Here, they either fight cognitive Okumura or Haru herself as a mid-boss. Either way really works, but as Haru returns to her senses, remembering she is not at fault for her father's death, Morgana explains to them that this happened because of Futaba's connection to the metaverse. Where most people are not aware of the distortion in their shadow selves, Futaba is completely cognizant of their actions and actively trying to kick them out of her palace.
They learn that Futaba has been plagued by cognitions ever since she was a child, where they appeared to her like specters. This led to her mother researching the metaverse in an effort to help her daughter sleep at night. Unfortunately, she experienced a mental shutdown, much like Okumura, and the fruits of her research were supposedly lost. Supposedly.
Big change here. They discover that Morgana was actually a robot created by Wakaba for the purpose of analyzing the metaverse. And the Metaverse Nav is a piece of programming she invented for the Metaverse Observation Navigational Archetype, or MONA. Futaba, using her own hacking prowess, was able to uncover the MONA database, which was how she was able to prompt them with the right keyword for her palace.
Futaba's change of heart allows her to let go of the guilt for her mother's death and gain her life back just like before. And she joins the team as their navigator, theorizing that whoever killed her mother is also responsible for killing Haru's father. And although Morgana is disappointed to discover he was never human, he admits that there are still things he doesn't understand about himself, like how he gained a persona in the first place, and claims that he wants to know more. He also confesses privately to Joker that he can't stop hoping that he can maybe someday become human regardless.
Kobayakawa is killed, and a calling card is planted in his office much the same. The death of Okumura earlier that year is also blamed on the Phantom Thieves, with new evidence of a calling card existing in his case. Everything from here until Sai's palace remains much the same, with some slightly altered character interactions for the sake of conforming to new plot elements.
Less manufactured drama with the fear of the public's dissent and having to disband, and more suspicion to Goro's sudden change of heart. By now, the Phantom Thieves have all accepted and resigned themselves to the fact that they act out of true justice, saving victims from shitty adults. Goro, however, works to reassure them that he will carry out their true justice under the measures of the law, which is meant to protect everyone. He tells them that no one person can escape the repercussions of their actions forever.
Foreshadowing.
Yes, foreshadowing. Also a desperate cry for help, as per usual.
A baby boy?
I know. Anyway, Sai's palace and Goro's betrayal really don't need to change much either. We catch back up with the beginning of the game, and the interrogation room scene plays out. As Joker sits quietly waiting for the next interrogator, Lavenza's voice and the butterfly return, asking if we remember our bonds. This time we see Goro as he shoots Joker, and the scenes that follow remain the same.
Joker is brought safely back to LeBlanc by Sai, who reveals that she was informed of the plan by one of her informants, who turns out to be Futaba. She demands an explanation for why she's saving someone who is a criminal suspect, and the team explains to her and Sojiro how the plan got off. This time, however, the reason for Joker's ability to escape death is that the metaverse is actually bleeding into reality, something that Goro is unaware of.
Instead of the metanav having been activated via the phone, the reality is that the metaverse's presence was incredibly strong in the interrogation room, something that Futaba and Morgana discovered on their own, and they hedged their bets that the cognitive Joker produced by Sai's palace would remain where she assumed he was, thus making a real gamble that he would survive.
Futaba reveals that Goro is answering to a man named Shido, and Sojiro reacts, saying it must be Masayoshi Shido for his connection to Wakaba. They ascertain that Goro is behind the mental shutdowns, and Futaba confirms that Shido's main investors generally saw a spike in profits after a shutdown case.
Not much of Shido's palace changes here either, though we could do without a few of those mouse puzzles. At least a safe room in the larger ones would be nice. Regardless, the big change is a design one, with the masquerade cognitions instead being puppets, because that's how Shido really sees people.
Or sheep.
Just make it all Catherine up in here.
Yeah! On their quest for the 5 letters of introduction, they discover how deep the conspiracy ran.
Under Hifumi's direction,
Makoto learns that Kaneshiro was laundering money for the campaign. An extracts the information about Kobayakawa being paid off to investigate the Phantom Thieves. Haru learns that her father was killed for not complying with Shido's terms. Futaba learns that Wakaba was killed because she was too close. And Yusuke discovers the cleaner is Shido's real-life hitman in the Yakuza. With 5 letters of introduction obtained, they return to the real world to issue the calling card.
Finally, on our way to Shido, we confront Goro once again, where he reveals his identity as Masayoshi Shido's son. No real changes here either. However, his rampage power, we're consolidating into mere shutdowns. The localization doesn't do a good job of differentiating them, but that's because there's no real need to. In this case, Goro has the ability to break bonds rather than make them. He uses this ability on shadows in the palace to place them in a desperation state, but when utilized on owners of a palace, he severs the bond between the shadow and the self, leaving the real-world person in the state of a mental shutdown, which often results in suicide. And when accused of being a puppet, he laughs.
A puppet? Perhaps. But does that make me any different from you? Changing the hearts of people in order to appease the masses. Your unanimous decision rule is proof enough that you are no less slaves to society than I am. True freedom is the ability to act independently of anyone else's wishes. Your bonds are nothing more than that. Shackles to the world and the wants of others, preventing you from true freedom.
They fight and win against Goro, and Cognitive Akechi appears. But this is where the player's most important decision comes into play.
Cognitive Akechi points his gun at the real Goro, and Joker is given the prompt just as the gun is about to go off. Save him or don't. If the player has been paying attention throughout every scene with Goro and the rest of the story up to this point, it should be obvious that the answer to achieve the true ending is to save him. With the themes of saving others from shitty adults being firmly established, Joker is meant here to sacrifice himself for yet another victim.
Joker dies in Goro's arms in an effort to prove to him that he had bonds whether he wanted them or not, and he cries out, calling Joker a fool. The Phantom Thieves, distraught at the loss of their leader, drop to their knees, unsure of what to do, and Ryuji lashes out at the Cognitive Akechi, destroying it.
Morgana is the first to come to his senses and remember the treasure, and he does his best to get the team back on their feet.
Well, aren't you coming?
What?
He gave you his life. So what are you going to do with it? They confront Shido immediately, and now personally enraged against him. The team begins tearing into his shadow for all the trouble he's caused. Goro watches them as they bring up their desire to avenge Joker, but he's unable to say much himself. He tries at first to say something important, but decides against it, saying that he'll fight beside them for Joker, and the player takes control of Goro as the new main character.
They defeat Shido, steal his treasure, and escape. Though mourning the loss of their leader, they are relieved to be done with this business. They agree to meet at LeBlanc the next day to watch Shido's press conference, and they all disperse, leaving Goro alone out in the cold.
The next day, the team arrives at LeBlanc, but Goro remains absent for the press conference. Shido goes live and thanks the public for the results of the election. He gives a rousing acceptance speech, promising to steer the country just as he has before, but says nothing of his crimes. The team questions about the lack of change in his heart, getting worked up that Joker's sacrifice was for nothing when Goro arrives looking deflated. They corner him, demanding answers, but he sighs and tells them that this is what he'd been trying to tell them all along.
With nowhere to go, and no one who wanted me, I sought out the man who caused all of this. I only knew his name, but nowadays that's all it really takes to find people. It just so happened the facility where he worked at the time was running a number of clinical research trials. I needed the money, so I participated. That's where I met Wakabe Ishiki. She took an interest in me immediately. I later learned that she'd run a paternity test on me and discovered who I really was. Nevertheless, she gave me the prototype to the metanav, and this allowed me access to the metaverse where I discovered my abilities. I awakened to my first persona, to Robin Hood, and together she and I learned about the metaverse and shadows, palaces and treasures. When she finally confronted me about being Shido's son, she proposed to me a plan: steal Shido's treasure, the source of his distortion, and change his heart for good. It was a noble plan, a brilliant one, but what we didn't foresee was that a person's heart is only capable of change if the ability to change is within them. In the case of Masayoshi Shido, his is a heart that cannot change.
This harkens back to something that Makoto's father once told her, something that she uses to justify hers and the Phantom Thief's actions throughout this story. No one can change your heart but you, and Goro goes on.
My perception of the world began to distort. I became distorted. My sense of justice, everything that I believed, was wrong. I could feel myself slipping away, uncertain of how I could ever hope for a future when the man who robbed me of it would never recognize what atrocities he committed. That's when the man who granted me my powers returned to grant me new power, the ability to shatter the bond between shadow and self. Without Ishiki's knowledge, I tracked down the palace of a reporter who had attacked Shido with a scathing article. I caused my first mental shutdown and used it as leverage to get in with Shido, but I had to prove myself to earn his trust. He ordered that I strike Ishiki next, and I obeyed. That reporter didn't die. I didn't realize that I didn't know that she'd kill herself.
Futaba has a hard time listening to this, but when they try to tell him to stop for her sake, she demands he continues so she hears the end of his story.
That was the moment Loki awoke. I became so distorted that my persona reflected that. It's truly fitting. Succumbing to the chaos in my own heart and awakening to the power of the god of chaos, I had no choice. If I truly wanted to take down Shido, it was either give in or give up.
He lets that sink in, and the team sits quietly, paralyzed in fear that there is truly nothing to be done about Shido. After a long moment, Morgana finally suggests the only other option they have: mementos, the heart of society. He reminds them that the answer lies at the bottom of mementos, and they agree to all go. They offer for Goro to come along with them, and he declines at first. They leave him, but Futaba stays behind to speak to him alone. If it wasn't for Joker, I would still believe I was responsible for Mom's death. When I was distorted, I hated myself more than the killer, and sometimes I still do. So I just want to tell you, keep on living, in spite of your hatred. That's what Mom and Joker wanted for me. I think that's what they'd want for you too.
This gives Goro the strength to join the Phantom Thieves as they go to Mementos to steal the heart of the public and make them turn on Shido. The player now plays as Goro in the role of the protagonist, and they make their way to the bottom of Mementos where they meet not the Holy Grail, but the Ark of the Covenant. Because what the fuck is up with the Holy Grail anyway? Because the Holy Grail is what caught the blood of Christ. It's what represents his divine lineage. Yaldabaoth, in Gnostic tradition, represents the Old Testament God. So why not have an Old Testament relic associated with it?
Because they're Japanese?
Objection! Because like the Holy Grail, the Ark is a treasure that is constantly sought by thieves, but it also serves a thematic purpose in that the Ark of the Covenant is what carries the stone tablets, the 10 Commandments, the symbol of mankind's rules. that it has constructed for itself. These rules were created and so worshipped by humanity that the treasure became a god. And in realizing that humanity constantly falls short and fails to abide by its rules, it decides to imprison humans to enforce them.
So, take that!
Goro functions the same way Joker does here. He meets Igor and recalls that this is the man who gave him his powers, but Igor just claims he's glad to have finally caught him. Just like with Joker, Igor demands the twins execute him, but instead they remember who they really are and make Goro fuse them back into Lavenza. Igor is revealed as the Ark, and she defends Goro from him before he disappears, and the real Igor is returned to his rightful place.
Igor explains to Goro the role of the trickster and how he was investigating the troublesome force he sensed at the bottom of mementos. It was there that he confronted the Ark of the Covenant, but it had grown too powerful for him to stop on his own. He bestowed the power of persona onto Mona, who had been exploring mementos, and ordered him to find the trickster. But with no memories of his own, and influenced by the collective unconscious, Morgana became convinced and preoccupied with the idea of being human, which made him late in meeting Goro before the Ark.
Lavenza tells him that the Ark wanted to use him as a bounty hunter for the palace owners, who were escaped convicts from his prison in Mementos, since it could not leave its place of power at the time due to how weak her master had made it. When Goro became distorted and defied the false god, the Ark sought the next trickster, Joker, to change his heart and take his place. Morgana apologizes to Goro and Igor for failing his mission, and they momentarily mourn the loss of Joker once more.
This leads into an unchanged progression up to confront the Ark of the Covenant's true form, Yaldabaoth. Instead of people disappearing from existence, however, cages erupt from below and imprison them, just the same as we witnessed in Mementos. When Yaldabaoth appears undefeatable, the Phantom Thieves all fall to their knees and despair, wishing desperately for Joker, who made everything seem possible.
As Goro cries out for Joker, finally acknowledging him as his friend, Lavenza's voice comes from behind, and they all turn to see the hero's charismatic smile. The Phantom Thieves stand and celebrate as Lavenza explains that because they kept Joker alive in their hearts, her master was able to bring him back to this world. As Goro and Joker face one another, the two tricksters eye to eye, Joker lifts his hand in the same gesture of a baton pass, and Goro, tears in his eyes, graciously clasps his hand and passes the player back to Joker.
Lavenza then erects the guillotines, asking if they know what they have to do, and both Goro and Joker nod. They call out for Loki and Arsene, and fuse the two in order to get Sataniel, and the final shot to Yaldabaoth resonates as humanity cries out for its freedom as before. Just like the power it granted Goro, the gun Sataniel uses severs the bonds humanity has to Yaldabaoth, emancipating them from its grasp.
From here, things start to wrap up cleanly. Morgana takes the public's treasure and returns it to Igor, who sets the world right but ultimately erases the public's memories of that day's events. Futaba agrees to help Sai by giving her all of her mother's research so that Shido's campaign and corruption can be revealed and dealt with. The team disperses to take care of things after Christmas, however, and Goro pulls Joker aside to make a small request. Up on the rooftop of the Diet Building, far away from the sight of the public, Shido stands on the edge of the roof as he's confronted and threatened by Goro and Joker.
Let me tell you how this is going to go. You are going to confess to your crimes and step down from your position. You are going to clear his record and admit the piece of filth you really are. And if you don't, well, I think you know just what I'm capable of. Don't you?
Shido at first tries to call his bluff, but Joker calls forth his persona, which is faintly visible to even Shido, as it's apparent that the metaverse and the real world are still connected, and terrified by the sight, he gulps and agrees. Goro promises that he'll continue to check in on Daddy Dearest to make sure he's been a good little boy, just in case, showing off his own persona as well. Addendum. This conclusion to Shido may seem a bit odd at first, but see, this story relies heavily on the idea that children will be victims to adults because nothing they say will ever be taken seriously due to their youth. The point of Joker being arrested and sued by Shido despite being and doing a good thing is because he's young, he is not credible. By reversing this, by taking away the adult's credibility because implicating that a child has more power than himself is in fact incredible, Goro and Joker here are finally able to break themselves from the adult figure's powerful rule, thus achieving their freedom and independence by their own hands. And this resolution to the Shido-Joker conflict allows everything to come full circle, something that is sorely missing in the original story.
And that's pretty much all that needs to happen after that. The game can wrap up with Joker's record being cleared, Shido turning himself in, and the Phantom Thieves fully accepting Goro as they all road trip to take Joker home. Or Joker can just stay in Tokyo because his parents seemed like real shits to get rid of him for something like that in the first place, so why go back?
And that's how easily you can fix the major issues with Persona 5. Keeping nearly all of the major story beats intact by reconfiguring the weakest parts of the story and rearranging certain events, it's absolutely possible to work with what the game tries to do and make it that much more effective.
And if for some reason the whole sacrificing Joker for Goro shtick is a problem, then that could have also been easily fixed to have Goro die for Joker instead, literally throwing himself in the line of fire to save Joker's life, having the thieves mourn the fact that they failed to protect a victim, and maintaining his memory in their hearts as they fight Shido. And in the Velvet Room, where Igor asks after Joker gathers his team if they're not forgetting someone, it's revealed that in one of those cells, shattered and in need of your help, a lonely Goro sits, thankful for you having remembered him and wanting him all along.
By further emphasizing the dichotomy between freedom and imprisonment, reinforcing the Phantom Thieves' raison d'etre, and providing more world building on the metaverse, the focus of the story can be made clear, making every palace personal to each new party member and keeping the characters focused on their desire to protect other victims. A real sense of camaraderie can develop amongst the team, which is imperative for when Goro ultimately betrays them. The sense of understanding they obtain through empathy allows them to grow as characters and helps the player to also share in that empathy. Simplifying the conspiracy with Shido's campaign also reduces plot holes and makes it easier to suspend our disbelief. Overall, simplifying the story as a whole and keeping its heart at the focus would correct most of its flaws. Look, Persona 5 was a great game, but its story holds a lot of lost potential. I hope that by explaining a constructive fix to its many problems, I'll have shed at least a little light on why I've been so critical all along. So I know I didn't address everything, but you've got to forgive me, this video is getting ridiculously long as is. I plan to do a couple of follow-up videos, so if you are interested, go ahead and give me a subscribe and maybe check out my per video Patreon. Real special thanks to Cody for helping me out with this video, as well as Jackie, who was the constant mental and emotional support that I needed throughout playing Persona 5, as well as the YouTubers who uploaded the Persona 5 footage that I kind of stole, all in the spirit of the game, of course, but I just never anticipated that I would be making a video about Persona 5, hence never actually capturing the footage separately from the streams. As for the Patreon, again, it is per video. I didn't necessarily want my first episode of Word Vomit to be about Persona 5, but that's just how it ended up working out. Hopefully you'll be looking forward to more of me and my words in the future, and that I didn't burn too many bridges with this. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.